On this episode of Civic Cocktail, writer and performer Lindy West talks pop culture, social justice, and politics in her signature style.
It's important to remember, especially right now, when the federal government is a disaster, that doing things locally is really, really important. I'm always nice. I'm just saying that if I don't like you, I know how to express it in an effective way.
And how does activism shape political change? Hear what Tina Podlodowski and Bill Bryant have to say.
If all they're doing is sitting, on Facebook and saying, you stink, no, you're more progressive, no, I'm more progressive, they've lost that particular moment.
When you think about how people think about parties right now across Washington State, most people are disgusted with both of them.
It's all coming up on Civic Cocktail.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Civic Cocktail. I'm Joni Balter here with Lindy West, Seattle-based writer, author, humorist. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks
really
for having
appreciate
me.
it. Journalist helping with the questioning this evening, Phyllis Fletcher, managing editor of Northwest News Network, and Eli Sanders, Lindy's longtime colleague and an editor at The Stranger. So Lindy, you have a really long job description. It sort of defies television. So in addition to all the things I just said, you write for GQ, and you have a regular column at The Guardian.
Yes.
What is the 7-word haiku description of what The Guardian column is about? And you can go a little longer.
Okay, well, it's what there's a real beauty and an art to the haiku. I feel going to be very disrespectful. I'm so sorry. But I guess, I look at the news, I pick what I want to yell about.
Yelling's important in all of this.
And
right?
I do.
Wow.
Don't encourage that.
Wow. Well done.
So yeah, it's yelling about issues.
Very nice. In your book, Shrill, which keeps with the same theme, this is a New York Times bestseller, a coming-of-age story about your somewhat tortured childhood growing up in Seattle.
My mother's here. It was not tortured.
No, I'm not saying she tortured. I'm just saying the childhood itself.
I mean, all childhoods are a little tortured, I think. But
Fair enough. So you graduated from Washington Middle School and Garfield High School.
I did.
For those. So why was the childhood so rough?
It was. I mean, it was kind of idyllic, actually. I mean, I sorry, though that sounds like I'm calling you a liar, but
I didn't take it that way.
It's just
more
complicated. I was just very shy. I was really, really shy. I was terrified to talk to anyone but my parents. I remember my mom forcing me to order my own food at a restaurant and feeling like I was gonna die. And then and sort of as I got older, and this is what most of the book is about, you discover that there's a really narrow set of parameters for how to be a woman and what you're supposed to look like and how you're supposed to act. And I discovered that I didn't quite fit that mold, and that we have a lot of punishments in place for people who don't. And so I just felt really kind of rejected and lonely and ugly, I guess, and worthless. This is what we teach girls. If you're not this one specific kind of girl, that you don't really have value, because we don't have any other metrics of value for girls and women besides a really narrow set of physical beauty characteristics,
I want to get into that a little deeper, but let's talk about the book title briefly. So Shrill and then Notes from a Loud Woman. There's something about volume here that's very important in this interview, and you've been saying you were quiet as a child. When did you find your voice?
I mean, it was this long, slow process, very slow. It was, people ask me that all the time, and I wish that I had a magic trick where
a moment or something.
Right, but it was more like, I remember there was a moment in 8th grade where I had to give an oral presentation, and I thought I was gonna die. And then I remember looking around the class and thinking, why am I afraid of these dweebs?
They're all dweebs in 8th grade, right?
Yeah, but I'd known them since we were 7, and I was like, why why am I afraid of you? This is totally weird. And then it was sort of like I just thought my way out of it, and then I just went up and talked, and it was fine, and I didn't die. And then, it was just as I got into my 20s, and especially once I started working at The Stranger, which I kind of tumbled into. I didn't have a clear plan for what I wanted to do. I just followed this path as it opened up in front of me. And once I got to The Stranger, it was such a sort of, magical, there were no restrictions on what you could write. You could play with the form, you could say bad words, and you could be mean, and you could...
I've read their editorials.
Yes. And I think it really, I don't know how my career would have gone or who I would be if I had gone into a sort of traditional journalism situation, but at The Stranger, it was just like the most valuable asset that I had was my voice and the very specific person that I was, and that was just rewarded over and over, and it was really, really empowering,
So you sent me, after we met, the obituary about your dad. It's really interesting because he was a pianist, a singer, and a humorist. So it sounds a little bit like your title. He was also in advertising. And he's part of a bygone era of Seattle, the old music scene here, which is pretty interesting. So how does, and then you describe yourself as so shy and, not like a performer, which you are now, but not at that time. So how do these two parts of your life connect?
I think it's amazing where I ended up. I mean, I just remember being a little kid, and I think, honestly, it kind of exacerbated my shyness because there was always this pressure to become this amazing entertainer. My dad was just such a rare, brilliant, magical person, and it was like, you do piano lessons, and then you'll be like that. And I was like, I just felt like...
You did take some piano.
Oh yeah, I took piano lessons for years. I was in choir. I played the trombone. I played the bass clarinet. Yeah, I know.
So you
I
did
actually
do
have
it.
it if you want. I don't.
You did do it.
Trombone solo. No, but I wanted to, I loved playing music. It was really fun, but I knew that I wasn't that. I knew that I was not like a natural musical genius. And I feel like there was this pressure to live up to that. Not really from him or from my mom or anything, but I felt like it was like my job, and then it made me very anxious and kind of, that wasn't what my path was. But I didn't know at the time that I had this other thing, that I had potential as a writer, and that there was another way for me to sort of entertain people, and eventually, once I got over my shyness, to perform for people, not in the same way that my dad did, but in a pretty surprisingly similar way.
Is your dad the reason you're funny?
I mean, I don't know. Partially. My mom's really funny too, though, so it's hard. She's funny in a different way. My dad was like, sort of, oh God, he was like, I don't know where to begin. He was like, I know every novelty song ever written. He was like this sort of like razzle dazzle. How do you even? We don't have this form of entertainment anymore, where people play the piano and tell jokes and sing a goofy, weird song. But he was like that. He was really droll and really funny. And then my mom is like kind of biting and.
And your mom happens
sassy.
to be here, but
and she's here, and
yes.
I think I learned a lot about being funny from my mom, and I feel like I'm kind of somewhere in between. Like, I'm kind of mean, but I'm also pretty nice. I don't know.
Is this one of the nights you're going to be pretty nice, right?
I'm always nice. I'm just saying that if I don't like you, I know how to express it in an effective way, which I think my mom's really good at.
So in your book, you write this sentence that I liked: "Culture is ours to shape." What do you mean, or even better, what is your own role in culture is ours to shape?
Well, I think something I've learned over the last decade of my career that I did not understand at the beginning was that it matters. It matters what you write in the newspaper, even if it's just a tiny theater review that 10 people are going to read. It's important to be responsible with the ideas that you put out into the world, because it's not nothing. So a lot of the book is me having these interactions with different communities that I was a part of. So talking to the comedy community about misogyny and having people tell me over and over and over again that it doesn't matter what comedians say on stage. It's just nothing. It just, evaporates. It doesn't reinforce stereotypes or the audience's prejudices, and it doesn't actually, you can't harm people with words. And I learned over the past decade that of course you can, and of course it does. Of course, if you make misogynist jokes in your comedy act, the misogynists in your audience leave feeling great, and the women in your audience don't. And that has an effect on the world at large. And I think to say that somehow if art has no impact on our world and on our politics and on our lives in a really visceral way, then why bother making it? So I've over the last 5 years especially, I've become a much more responsible writer, a much more careful writer, and I really watch what ideas I'm dumping into the water supply, because I think it's important. Even if I have a minuscule audience, I think it still matters.
So there's a huge social justice component to your writing. I've read a lot of your stuff in your book as well. Where does that come from? What do you think are the greatest injustices right now?
Right now in particular, it's like the problem with this, I don't know how political I'm allowed to be.
You can do whatever you want.
Cool. The problem with this administration is that there are so many atrocities or proposed atrocities happening at once that you can't even keep the whole list in your head. Like, I'll get really upset about climate change, and then I'm like, oh yeah, also well, I can't even, like, everything, also everything else. Also, we're gonna have a nuclear war. Maybe, if he feels like it. Like, and no more education, sorry. No more abortion, sorry. No more healthcare for anyone. Like, oh, you can't have an abortion, but we're also not gonna pay for your medical care when you're pregnant. Like, and also there's no social safety net for your baby once it's born. Like, it's just, there's so many things that,
you're writing feverishly. You're not for want of
topics. It also kind of just shuts you down. And I think that's part of the mechanism of how this sort of Trumpism works, is that there's too many things to look at. There's too many things. It's kind of like everyone just has to pick one thing and then focus on that, and hopefully we'll get everything covered. But I don't know, I can't pick.
I think that's one of the challenges for people who are becoming civically active as well. And we'll get to that in the next segment. One of the chapters in the book is called Hello, I'm Fat. And this is a very interesting chapter in part because it details a very public spat you had with stranger columnist Dan Savage, who, and wasn't he your boss?
Columnist and editor-in-chief.
Yeah. So like you have this, tell us a little bit about it. You have this fight and the guy's kind of your boss, right?
Completely my boss. Very extremely my boss. No, it was probably 5 years ago, and I was working at The Stranger. I was in charge of the film section, and it was just this moment in history when people were really, even, because they're still fixated on this, but people were especially fixated on the obesity epidemic and how fat people were a horrible moral scourge that was going to kill us all somehow by eating all the food or something. And sorry, I get so flip about this, and I'm sure Dan wants to kill me. So Dan was one of these people who was interested in this topic, and the way that, especially 5, 6, 10 years ago, the way that we wrote about fat people was really, really dehumanizing, especially dehumanizing, even more than it is now, and it still is. It was totally normal to take a clandestine picture of some fat people in public and post it on the blog and be like, look at these disgusting people and their glandular problems, and make fun because they were eating food. Oh, God forbid people eat food, the thing that we all need to live. And so I just sort of watching this unfold. He was writing about it a lot, and in this kind of snide way that I found pretty hurtful and dehumanizing. And I just had this realization, does he not know that I'm here? Does he not realize that he's writing about me? Because I think there's this tendency to, you know, make an exception for your friend. Like, oh, well, I don't mean you. I mean like the bad kind of fat people who are gluttonous. And it's like, well, that means you mean me then. If you're talking about this group of people, you don't get a pass. Anyway, so in keeping with the culture of the paper, which was very confrontational and very transparent, you know, we often had sort of public arguments on the blog. I didn't invent that idea. Dan did, really. So he has only himself to blame. So I went on the blog and I wrote this very long thing saying, you know, hello, I am a fat person. I work in your office. We are friends. I'm your employee. I work really hard for this paper, and I had this realization that if I didn't sort of self-identify and say I'm a fat person, and I might have this body forever, I don't know. Statistically, I will, because the percentage of people who actually lose large amounts of weight and keep it off forever is very small. So just confronting that idea, like, what if I'm fat forever? Is this the kind of person I want to be? The kind of person who doesn't stick up for herself, who doesn't stick up for other people who look like me, other people who are being discriminated against? Because it's not just about feelings. You know, fat people face employment discrimination and medical discrimination. I mean, there are real systemic forces that oppress fat people. I mean, people hate it when you say that. Sorry, but I'm not sorry. And so, yeah, so I just wrote this manifesto, kind of slightly calling my boss a bigot-ish.
Ish. As long as you have ish, I think you're covered, right?
Yeah, that was fine. Yeah. And then he was mad, and then we went out and had a pretzel and a beer, and it was fine. soft pretzel. So heals all wounds.
Audience, if you want to ask a question, come to that place. And Eli Sanders works at The Stranger. He remembers something from that.
Of course, fondly. But I miss you at The Stranger, of course.
I miss you.
One of the things I miss is having you involved in our fights and discussions on staff. And I wonder, you were talking a minute ago about being careful about what you put out there, what you put into the water supply, about picking your words and your battles. There's such a churning argument right now about speech, free speech, censoring free speech. We've got what happened at the UW with Milo, you've got Berkeley, and I wonder if you have any clarity to offer. How do you find a clear place to stand in this, where you are not walking into a right-wing trap by becoming anti-Constitution censor or whatever, but also defending what you believe and finding a way to say, hey, you can't say that. Okay, you can say that, but really you can't say that.
Yeah, you know, I think, I mean, there is, yes, okay. It's so complicated and hard to talk about, right? Like I'm actually working on a big article about this right now, and it's hard. So I'm going to try to do it justice. I mean, in terms of, say, Milo Yiannopoulos, for example, I firmly believe, so he was going around to schools, and not always public universities, but sometimes private colleges, which I think have every right to say, no, we don't have this here. And I think that public universities, if a person is coming in who is actually inciting violence, which I believe he was traveling around, he was outing trans students, he was naming individual students and putting their picture up on the screen, he was talking about going and identifying undocumented students, and in my opinion, that is inciting violence against individual students, which also, I think, hinders the free speech of marginalized students. You know, a thing that I think gets lost in this coddled co-ed political correctness free speech conversation is that if you have some campus group, you know, dressing up like the KKK for Halloween, that impacts black students' ability to fully engage in public life at their school, to feel comfortable expressing themselves, and to feel safe. And that is also an issue of free speech and free expression. And also, you know, they pay tuition to be at that school, and they deserve to be protected by their administration. So I think it's a really short-sighted like white guy argument to be like, no, it doesn't, anyone can come on campus and say literally anything and it can't hurt anyone. Of course it can. And I also think that going back to the conversation when I was arguing with comedians, which I write about in the book, you know, I think this is what I came up against immediately was any sort of criticism of comedy is censorship, and I'm infringing on their First Amendment rights. And I honestly believe that that idea that any criticism is censorship had a lot to do with what happened to us in November, the incident, we call it around my house. Because you know, when you, one thing that social justice movements do is fight really hard to establish certain shared cultural values. You know, Nazis are bad. You know, rape is bad. Racism is bad. And I think this idea that we can't critique certain ideas because then we're censoring that person, and therefore everyone needs a voice. All ideas are equally valid. If you have a scientist on your cable news show, you have to have a climate change denialist and a medieval barber surgeon. You know what I mean? Like, and I really think that had a lot to do with America losing its grip on what's real and what's not real, and what's okay and what's not okay. It is okay for us to say that certain things are okay and certain things are not okay. Certain ideas are acceptable and certain ideas are not. Certain ideas are dangerous and certain ideas we do not tolerate because we believe in, there's a kind of a society that we want to build. So, you know.
I want to bring Phil Fletcher in.
I really admire that you make really basic arguments that you think everyone should know, like, you know, racism is bad, or fat people have basic humanity and deserve all the rights that you're entitled to as a human, and deserve basic respect. And I think that you're one of the people who actually can and has changed individual people's minds about that. And when you've done that, how do you think you did it?
Oh, that's such a nice thing to say. Thank you. I don't know. I mean, I think the most important thing I do is just to hold the line. Like, I just write the same column over and over and over and over. Because
could have fooled us.
Yeah, I mean,
looks different.
Well, I try to gussy it up. But I mean, really, there are these ideas. You know, people have a really short memory, especially when it's convenient for them. And so there's this idea that, like, oh, you wrote this thing once and now it's checked off the list, and it's not. People go out of their way to forget. And
That's interesting.
And so I think not just in putting those ideas out there and standing by them, but letting people see you not fold when people try to shut you up and change your mind is really, really important. Like, just the act of doing that publicly and not caving and not being quiet when people try to make you be quiet, I think it gives people pause and makes people think, okay, maybe there's some merit to this idea if she's weathering this much, you know, this many death threats and still not caving. And you know, that's not a perfect system, because obviously there are plenty of people with real bad ideas who have been clinging to them for many generations. Yeah. But you know, yeah, I think just that being consistent and being strong is really, really helpful.
Yeah. All right, an audience question. Hi.
Hi. What have you done and what do you plan to do to hold Stephen Colbert to account for his gay joke regarding the relationship between Mr. Trump and Mr. Putin?
I don't like that joke. I don't think that it was a good joke. I think it relies on cheap misogyny and homophobia. In terms of holding people accountable, you know, we have really good social processes in place. We have Twitter, we have email, we have Facebook, and that's kind of all you can do is, you know, make sure that people know that, you know, we do have standards, and it's not helpful. Like, it's not helpful to fight this homophobic, misogynist administration with homophobia and misogyny. In terms of me, I mean, I don't know. I quit Twitter, and I've certainly been talking about it on Facebook with my friends. I don't know what you do beyond that. Like, I don't think that Stephen Colbert deserves to be fired from his job for a joke I mean, maybe he does. That's a valid argument. You know, all you can do is express your displeasure publicly and let him know. I personally believe that Stephen Colbert is trying to be on the right side of history, and hopefully that he would be mortified if he realized that he did a bad job on that joke. But I don't know. I mean, all you can do is use your voice to make sure that these ideas are not being bulldozed and ignored, you know?
So our time is racing. One more question from the audience.
Hi, Lindy. I'm a fan. I just finished your book, Shrill. I was struck by what you said about the need for being a responsible writer, but then also having the urge to yell about things. And I'm curious to know where you think your prose or your words have more power, in The Stranger or The Guardian?
Oh, I mean, The Guardian has a much broader reach, but I am more constrained. I can't write the way that I wrote in The Stranger. So it's just different, you know? And in The Stranger, I wasn't writing straight ahead, you know, feminist pieces about global politics. I was writing movie reviews, and I was writing about local politics and, you know, local culture. So it's just totally different. But The Stranger is amazing because you can have an impact on your immediate community. You know, we did election endorsements, and I mean, not me, because I have no journalism skills, but other people broke news stories. And you know, I think it's important to remember, especially right now, when the federal government is a disaster, that doing things locally is really, really important and has a huge impact, and that's where people need to start. Like, people need to run for small local offices and make change in your own community. So, yeah, I'm really proud of the work we did there.
When you Google Lindy West's Wikipedia page, and no, we're not supposed to look at Wikipedia, but up pops a picture of you in a T-shirt that says, "Lord, give me the confidence of a mediocre white man." Why is that your motto, or one of your mottos?
I think a troll put that there, by the way, to get people to yell at me, but that's fine. I stand by it. No, I mean, I think our world is set up to validate and to help certain people and to leave other people behind. And I think you can see, not to keep harping on this administration, but is there anyone more aggressively useless and mediocre than the president, than Donald Trump? And you can just see how low the bar is. You can see how low the bar is for like just an average straight white dude with a bunch of money. Like, you can just do whatever you want. No one stops you, apparently. So I am against that system with every cell in my body. So.
So you are the co-founder of the Shout Your Abortion campaign. A lot of folks have heard of it, but they don't really know what it is. And just real tight, can you tell us a little bit about how you got involved in that and what's that about?
Yeah, so 2015, when the sort of Planned Parenthood baby parts hoax videos were going around, and they were really talking seriously about defunding Planned Parenthood, a friend of mine and I were just talking about the way that, because it's so stigmatized, so taboo to talk about abortion, even if you're pro-choice, there's just this huge vacuum that anti-abortion activists can fill with whatever kind of horror stories they want and whatever kind of propaganda they want. And so we just wanted to start a sort of a space and a movement where people can tell any kind of abortion story, to normalize it, to destigmatize it, because the fact is that a lot of people have abortions. People across the whole political spectrum, people across the class spectrum, race, people who picket outside of abortion clinics have abortions. And so the truth is, it's true. It's 1 in 3. So there are a lot of people in this room who've had abortions. Sorry, I didn't mean to implicate all of you because it's a voluntary movement. It's not compulsory. Sorry. But so, we just really wanted to take that space back. Like, for example, Amelia and I were both talking, and she said, she had an abortion, and she felt nothing but relief, which is the most commonly expressed emotion after an abortion, relief and gratitude. And abortion care providers get no recognition, no gratitude. They have to sort of live in fear for their lives, and they still do this work to take care of pregnant people, and it's really, really important. So we wanted to honor that. I could talk to you
all night, but we are out of time, and we are coming right back to talk about hepped up civic engagement in the age of Donald Trump. Welcome back, and welcome aboard to Bill Bryant, recent Republican candidate for governor and also former port commissioner. And welcome to Tina Podlodowski, current chairwoman of the Washington State Democrats. Thank you both for being here.
Thanks, Jay.
Thank you.
So let's talk a bit about all this civic activism everybody's talking about. Tina Podlodowski, what is the most effective thing that someone who wants to become active can do to make change?
Help us win elections. I mean, the bottom line is winning elections is how you can make the greatest political change. Tell doing anything else to the undocumented immigrant in the Yakima Valley now who's afraid of ICE knocking on their door. Does it matter who wins the election? Of course it does. Tell it to Neil Gorsuch and Merrick Garland, one of whom is sitting at home and the other who's making decisions about our lives. Do elections matter? Of course it does. Tell it to Bill and myself, you know? We shouldn't be here this evening. No. Bill should be sitting in the governor's mansion yelling at Democrats. I should be yelling at Bill.
I would not be yelling at Democrats because we'd be done out of session.
No way. I'd be yelling at you. I'd be yelling at you.
Too soon.
No way. I'd be Secretary of State and I'd be yelling at you about things like postage paid ballots and automatic voter registration and same-day registration.
But there would be no legislators.
Elections matter. Elections matter.
Bill, you agree?
Elections matter. I mean, yeah, elections matter.
Is that the most effective thing
that's
these
the whole
folks
thing.
can
We have
do?
a lot of people who want to get involved now on both sides of the spectrum. And to simply say, and I'm not disagreeing at all, elections matter, you need to volunteer in a campaign, that's true, but I think it disenfranchises a lot of people who don't have the ability to run for office themselves or to volunteer on a campaign. And also, there's things to be done on years that aren't your big campaign years. I mean, I find myself now back as a citizen, and I'm trying to remain very engaged. And so what I'm doing is re-engaging with two causes that I really am passionate about: homelessness and salmon recovery. Pick an issue that you really are passionate about. Research which NGOs and which nonprofits are working on them and find out how you can help them. It may be volunteering with that organization. It may be following issues and writing thoughtful emails or making testimony at public hearings or sending those emails to officials who have a decision to make. But there are ways to get involved in the off years that can be issue-oriented as opposed to candidate-oriented.
Well, in this particular off year, these folks will want me to ask you, are you running for mayor of Seattle?
Do you really want to get into that right now?
No, just a real quick answer.
No, the real quick answer is no. The longer answer is that, literally without exaggeration, strangers will come up to me 3 to call it 9 times a day and ask me to run. A lot of them start by saying, I've never voted for a Republican before, will you please run for mayor? It's flattering, but I think that it says as much about me as it does the slate of candidates people now have to choose from, and they're looking for someone who has a different perspective than those who are currently running.
Tina, I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say, Bill, they've been asking me too, so come on. But the reality is there is no such thing, I think, anymore as an off year in politics. I think every year is an on year. I think every day is an on day. We need to be out there and organizing for political change 365 days a year, 24/7, and there's lots of things that comprise that. So we're never, again, in an off year.
So zoom out for me, Tina Podlodowski, to some of the other things that folks, we're talking about sort of, yes, campaigns, all of that, but a broader activism. What are some of the other things that you will tell the folks in this room who want to get involved?
Sure.
What should they do? What could they do?
You know, we've seen that, I think, with so many people, whether it's working for a political party, whether it's being a part of an indivisible group, whether it's just working in your community and understanding the issues. I mean, suddenly, since that fated day that Lindy was talking about in November, so many people... The day we lost. Yeah, so many people have become civic nerds.
Sympathies here.
Right, civic nerds in ways that they haven't had before, in the ways that we haven't taught people to be before, and sort of understanding how the process works. So I think that there's many opportunities to plug in. We've got, you know, the 100th day of Trump, the Washington State Democrats, we tweeted out 100 different ways that you could get involved in different things. You can go to our website and check all of those things out. Knitted goods, another way, right? To be able to do that.
That's not a prop, I know.
No, it's not. It's, you know, it's not. We learn from the pink hats, right? That knitted goods sell, so hence the Democratic scarves. So, yeah.
So let's do it this way. Bill, tell us what was your first political action in your life? What was the first activity that you chose and that got you into politics?
Having just said that, there are things to do besides working on a campaign, my first real involvement was working on a campaign.
For whom?
For J.T. Quigg, who was
Who's
a
J.T.
unique
Quigg?
beast in that he was a Republican from Grays Harbor. And he had been elected to the state senate and re-elected to the state senate from a very Democrat district. And he was running against Don Bonker for the 3rd congressional seat in 1982. Not a good year to be running as a Republican, particularly in a Democrat seat. But I was back east at college, and some friends of friends knew him, and he was looking to put together a staff. And after an interview or two over Christmas break, they asked me to come back and be the press secretary. So I was the speechwriter, press secretary, driver on a congressional campaign for a year, and that is when I began getting more involved in different ways.
Tina, what was your
With
first
a name
action?
like Podlodowski, who grew up in New Britain, Connecticut, but I grew up between 2 institutions, the Polish Catholic Church and the Union Hall. So it was definitely the solidarity movement as I was a kid in Poland, where we were doing work to send things back to support the folks who were there and striking and working. I'm a kid who grew up on the picket line and thought, when I was 7 or 8, that those barrels that were on fire, that everyone was around keeping them warm, those are pretty cool. Is this what was, was this what was working a picket line was about? But learned pretty quickly that it wasn't, and that it was about taking care of people, fundamentally taking care of people. So that's something that started me on this path and has driven me my whole life.
I'm going to bring the journalist in. Eli.
So, Tina, from the world that I inhabit, the stranger and the circles of the left that we connect with in Seattle, it's almost not enough, or it's definitely not enough anymore, to have a Republican and a Democrat. They also want a socialist in the mix, maybe someone from the People's Party. And what I hear a lot, especially from engaged millennials right now, is that they, after the incident, after Donald Trump's election, want an apology from the Democratic Party. They want contrition, and they want to hear the Democrats say they understand that something is badly broken. Are you hearing that, and what do you say?
I say, I understand that something is badly broken. That's why I became party chair 92 days ago, to fix what is badly broken. I think if you look at the Democratic infrastructure, not just in Washington state, but around the country, it is as badly broken as our transportation infrastructure. And if we really want to be able to have people heard and also have elected officials that are responsive to the needs of everyone in Washington state, and that's what I think about, not just inside the Seattle bubble, but everywhere in the state, that infrastructure is definitely broken. The way that we've run campaigns has been broken. What's happened here in Washington state, particularly in the last 10 years, has been broken. And if Democrats don't wake up to that, heck, we've got a Republican in the presidency, we've got a Republican Congress in both parts of the Congress. We have 32 states that are under the control of Republicans. We're only 4 states away from them being able to call a congressional or a constitutional convention and permanently amend the Constitution. So if we think it ain't broken, it is. And I'm sorry, I didn't completely break it, but I'm here to fix it.
Phyllis.
Bill, I was a big fan of your TV commercial where you got a pizza delivered to you while you were sitting in I-5 traffic.
I was in Spokane just last week, and this guy comes up, oh, it's the Pizza Man.
Does everybody
I should have
know
put
what we're
Pizza
talking
Man
about?
on the ballot. It would have been better.
Does everybody know the commercial we're referring to? During the governor's race, I will explain, there was I thought, a very clever ad, although I heard from some folks who didn't like it, but I totally liked it.
I think overwhelmingly
And
people
it was an ad where everybody's stuck in traffic on 405, right? Or whatever.
Well, it was actually it
All
looked
right,
like
whatever,
405.
It looked like
yeah.
405. And someone knocks, somebody on foot or on a roller skates or something, knocks on the window and delivers a pizza. Please go ahead.
That's great.
That's great.
And something it made me think about is this kind of tug of war between urban politics and rural politics, and how when you're running for statewide office, you try to marshal both. And so since we're thinking and talking about activism, I was wondering, where do you think rural people find their power in a state like Washington, whether it's activism, we're talking about there are different kinds of activism, elections, supporting a candidate, protests, lawsuits, all these different types of ways to be a proponent for something that could benefit you. Where do you think rural people have their power in that?
I love that question because I struggle, and throughout the campaign struggled an awful lot with trying to figure out how the state comes together. And Seattle is very different from parts of King County, and then King County is different from a lot of the rest of the state. And it is not, we're not coming together. And it's, like you said, it's broken, but it's not just the infrastructure of the Democratic Party that's broken. Our ability to, as a state and as a people, and even I would argue as a country, from rural and urban areas, or from the left and the right, to come together and have a civil conversation is broken. People will ask me what was the biggest surprise on the campaign, and they would say, is it how diverse the state is? Well, I lived and grew up in, or not grew up, but lived in Eastern Washington, grew up over in the Olympics in Southwest Washington, so I sort of moved around the state already a lot in rural and urban areas, and run for office twice in King County. So that, the diversity didn't surprise me. What surprised me in the course of this campaign is how certain everybody is about very complicated issues. And they are so damn certain that they're right that they don't feel the need to listen to anybody else. That's broken. You might say the millennials are asking for an apology from the Democratic Party. I would actually argue that most people want an apology from both parties. That when you think about how people think about parties right now across Washington state, most people are disgusted with both of them. And they don't think either party really represents them. And both parties have got to, go ahead. Both parties have got to start realizing that for the good of the Republic, we have got to elevate the course of civil conversation, and we've got to pull together rural and urban and bring people from both sides of the spectrum into a place where we can have a conversation about where we want to go as a people and a country. And that's why City Club and Civic Cocktail is so
Civic
great.
Cocktail is one stop on that tour. Audience, join us if you want to ask a question. Tina, I'll ask you this first. Seattle just experienced another noisy but very peaceful May Day celebration. Before the event took place, Seattle City Council member Shama Sawant had suggested that highways, not freeways, and maybe the airport might be shut down during that. And so the question I want to get at is, what's more effective? Being disruptive or trying to win hearts and minds?
I think each has its place depending upon the situation. So being disruptive, you look at the civil rights movement, that was a very disruptive movement in making that happen. In this context of the May Day March, I don't know that shutting down the highways or shutting down the airport would have put an agenda forward in any way, shape, or form. I think you look at what happened with the Women's March, and you look at what happened around the state of Washington. We had 150,000 people here in Seattle, but you had 10,000 people in Spokane. You had 2,500 people in the Tri-Cities. Heck, you had over 200 people in Chewelah, Washington, for heaven's sakes, out there and marching. That was incredibly disruptive in terms of getting people to stop, look, and listen in a different kind of way. I actually disagree a little bit with Bill on the rural question that Phyllis asked about, because I think it's a matter of stopping and listening to people and see where the commonality is. I think where political parties have really done themselves a disservice, whether it's Democrat or Republican, although I'll always argue the Democrats, we are not doing as big a disservice as you guys, but have stopped listening and stopped really having conversations and listening to what people are saying, as opposed to trying to get them to vote one way in a particular election. I think that's why you're seeing the rise of organizations like Knock Every Door and deep canvassing or deep conversation to understand those issues. I think that's why.
What is Knock Every Door?
Knock Every Door is an organization that is normally, if somebody comes to your door and wants to sort of identify you as a voter, and having that voter data is so incredibly important no matter who's running for office. And the two real repositories of that data are the Republican Party and the Democratic Party for their candidates. So how do we identify you as a voter? So Joni, we might ask you some questions. And we probably didn't ask you very sophisticated ones to understand, would you vote for a Democratic candidate or a Republican candidate, or which way would you lean? Knock Every Door is about asking questions and then listening and doing deep listening. And that's a technique that we're bringing up and we've partnered with in the Democratic Party to hear what people are saying. Because I do think underlying a lot of these issues are economic inequality issues
candidates
around the
have
state.
knocked on the doors,
And
for
you
a
know what
long,
they do?
long time.
Yeah, they've knocked on the doors, and you know what they do? Hi, my name is Tina. I'm running for Secretary of State. You know, please vote for me. Here's the literature, as opposed to having deep conversations with individuals to understand where is that kind of commonality. I think there's plenty commonality with a person dealing with income inequality issues here in the city of Seattle, as well as, you know, in Ritzville on the other side of the state.
Audience question? Hello. Hi.
Hi. My question is, why is it that the parties don't seem to care about the local organizations that they've set up, like the 48th, the 45th? At no point tonight have you highlighted their accomplishments, but you've highlighted the accomplishments of a number of other organizations. And one of the pushes that parties have been made is to grow out their local endeavors, but it seems none of the elected party officials or candidates like to highlight that. Is that?
I'm not really sure of the question in terms of talking about what the districts, the organizations themselves are doing.
So one of my personal complaints is that there is no effort, it seems no effort by the party to push people into their local chapters, but into like Indivisible and Knock on Doors. And I can speak personally that I did not even know that there was a local chapter of the Democratic Party that was as...
But ask her a question that she can respond to. Be specific.
Why is the party not pushing for more local endeavors by its candidates?
The party is pushing for it. I would say take out your phone right now and text the word persist to 444-999 and we'll get you right into your local party organization. So I think that's a big part of what we're trying to do. For parties, this work on the ground with different people, precinct committee officers, individuals who are there walking and talking to voters is incredibly important. There are 7,229 precincts in the state of Washington. From a Democratic Party standpoint, maybe 50% of those precincts are filled. That's a place that we're pushing people to become, you know, what my mom always said was the nosy neighbor or the person who knows their neighbors. And it's really different no matter where they are, any place in the state, right? The precinct committee officer really should be the precinct community organizer. But it's different in Seattle, where I can walk my precinct in 4 hours, and way different up in Pend Oreille County, where it's between 1 mile and 5 miles, you know, from a house. So different techniques, different ways to deal with it, different ways to get people engaged in their local communities.
So Bill, being disruptive or winning hearts and minds? Want to give you a chance to answer that one.
Well, it depends on what your objective is. If your objective is to draw attention to yourself, then trying to encourage people to shut down freeways and airports is probably a good way of going about it. If your objective is to affect real change, that's probably somewhere between an irresponsible and a lousy way of going about it. But some people don't really care about affecting real meaningful change as much as they care about drawing attention to themselves. I think that the people who we have seen in the streets protesting in recent weeks and months really care about affecting change. And the challenge that we all have is to figure, and all of us, whether you're which side you're marching on, is that marches in and of themselves can be disruptive. They don't have to be, but they can be. But they're only going to be a means to affecting real change if they're followed up by more substantive actions. Otherwise, you got a lot of frosting and no cake. And I think too often people get all wrapped up, some people get all wrapped up in the symbolism of the moment and forget about the fact that the civil rights movement was not just a function of a lot of parades, but a lot of people working very hard to change legislation at the local and the federal level. And that requires people who are more serious than those who incite the worst of our emotions.
Phyllis.
What's a specific protest movement you admire post-civil rights era?
Well, I'm sorry you added post-civil rights era because, but I'll see if I can, but I have on my desk 7 portraits, one of whom is Dr. King. My mentor, who passed away a dozen years ago, marched in a lot of those marches in Washington, D.C. And he would show me his pictures. Maybe this is a good thing about going back to civil discourse. Those civil marches weren't as disruptive as we think of a lot of marches today.
I don't know about that.
When he showed me his pictures, well, let me see what I'm saying. It was a different style. And that when he showed me those pictures, you have people who are, and this is a different era, I understand, but people who are in coats and ties, marching with Dr. King. And you look at how people behaved on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. They weren't throwing red dye into the reflective pool. And as a result, I think you saw a lot of people who would not respond normally to a protest realize that these were very serious people who had very legitimate concerns. They were very difficult to dismiss. And I think that we need to make sure that when we are out protesting, regardless of the cause, you're projecting the seriousness of the issue and not getting wrapped up in the symbolism and the frivolity of it.
But don't you sometimes think that we need symbolism to be effective? Like there were people who were willing to be dragged out of diners in that movement, or there were people who filled up Fifth Avenue in Manhattan during the ACT UP AIDS activism era. And you could say, oh, it's rainbow flags and that kind of thing. But I think that that's trivializing how many people they needed in order to turn a corner on some of these issues.
No, I would agree with you 100%, and I would not want to trivialize it. But I would argue the people who go in and sit down at a counter and then are forced to be withdrawn, they have behaved entirely appropriately.
Eli.
You both talked about the collapse of civil discourse, and you're both lamenting it. One of the ironies of this moment is that there has never been, even as you're saying, people can't talk to each other across political lines, there has never been more political speech, I don't think. There have never been more ways to communicate with each other across distances, across divides. You're offering people an opportunity to text to the Democratic Party to become involved. So what exactly is the problem? If we have more ways to communicate than ever before, why is our communication so broken?
I think it's, can I jump in here?
Go.
I think it's because we use these wonderful vehicles we have to talk to each other and to talk to people who agree with us. We don't use these mechanisms to actually have a thoughtful exchange of ideas with people we might disagree with. And when we're disagreeing too often, whether it's on Facebook or a radio call-in show, it's a vitriolic tone that is not conducive to having a thoughtful conversation.
So, Tina,
I'm gonna agree with Bill. How's that for a thoughtful agreement?
That's civil discourse.
I think you voted for me, didn't you?
You know what? Your vote is private, Bill. Your vote is private.
So, Tina, I wanted to ask you, there was a piece in the New York Times, the writer David Gellis was talking about people making pretty big life changes in the era of Donald Trump. And the story featured a guy who worked in the solar industry, and he's already working in the get out the vote and for the 2018 races, congressional races, as crazy as that seems this early. And of course, people leave careers to run for office. So how much of this kind of wholesale change in people's lives do you see?
A lot. I mean, I just came back from, so again, I've been state party chair for a little over 90 days. I've had 6 trips to Eastern Washington. Just came back from Pasco. There were 350 people in a town hall meeting to see the state party chair in Pasco. That would not have happened pre-November 8th, frankly. And people are there, and they're making tremendous amounts of change in their lives to do it. And I don't think that getting ready for 2018, doing GOTV for 2018, is a bad thing to be doing right now. In fact, I think it's the prudent thing to be doing right now in so many different ways. I think that this moment has been a wake-up call for many folks.
What I meant is we're sort of permanent elections.
I think, yeah, but I think that it's been a wake-up call for many folks and a call to service in a different way. If you look at the last sort of 60 years and, the Kennedy era and this idea that running for office, public service was a noble sort of thing to do. And then somewhere along the line, politics became incredibly dirty. If you were engaged in politics in some way, there was something wrong with you, not something right with you. If you wanted to run for office, it was because you were an egomaniac, not because you cared. All of those things have happened, and it's time to change that perception. And I think we have a whole new wave of people who are really interested in making sure that those fundamental principles, those issues and values that they hold dear are reflected in the political system and in the way that politics gets done.
So I have a very patient audience member who's going to ask a question.
This question is mostly for Ms. Podlodowski. I have friends on one side who say there's too much infighting within the progressive movement. That's why we keep losing. Other friends are saying this is our opportunity. We can really shift this and make this more progressive. We can, take the mantle of Bernie Sanders and move this and make this into something we really want it to be. How do you reconcile? These are within my own friend group,
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that those are valid discussions and a valid argument, and as long as people are coming together to elect like-minded folks who want to carry out that agenda, that's the bottom line. If all they're doing is sitting there and organizing about what or arguing about what their moment is, as opposed to organizing and electing people, that moment is definitely lost. If all they're doing is sitting, on Facebook and saying, you stink, no, you're more progressive, no, I'm more progressive, they've lost that particular moment. So I think one of the best ways is to get engaged, get involved, and start talking to folks about where that commonality is. You look at the Democratic Party platform, particularly here in Washington State. I mean, everything from, we had single payer before anybody who's, joined Bernie's campaign was talking about single payer and those issues. You look at where there has been an arc of progressivism. Look at me. Back in 1999, when I was a Seattle City Council member, I put together the first civilian review of police in the city. I added gender identity to all the ordinances in the city of Seattle as part of the civil rights components of that. 1999, and here we are back in 2017 still arguing about bathrooms. So I think that so many people agree within the particular progressive movement. I think they might be getting stuck in different lanes as opposed to listening to each other about how we can make positive change.
So Bill, I was talking to my son, he lives in DC, and I was talking to him during the climate march. And he raised an interesting point of overkill on marches. In other words, there was the science march. They had the best signs of anybody, absolutely, hands down. But just this sense of how to keep the marches sort of fresh and meaningful, and so that they'd still have impact, so not to have permanent marches. What do you think is the danger there, if any?
I don't know. As long as people show up and are interested in it, there's going to be an effectiveness to it when you can demonstrate this many people really care about this issue, whether it's climate change and science or whether it's equality on a number of fronts. What I think people are, if you're trying to influence people beyond the group that is motivated to turn out and protest, and you want to be seen on the television sets of people who might not be as involved in that issue as you are, then I think how that march is conducted is very important. I think that the May Day marches here in Seattle were conducted in a very thoughtful, responsible way, and I think it's much easier to communicate your points of view when that happens. Fatigue, I think people get tired of watching marches that seem to be melees, and that has a negative response. But as long as people are exercising their right to express their dissatisfaction or support for an issue, and they're conducting themselves responsibly, that's what makes democracy strong.
I can't think of any marches since November 8th that I would call a melee. And I look at those marches and I think of them as perfect entry points to find people like you. I liken it to the experience that I had as a young lesbian walking into my first gay bar. And it's like, oh my God, there are people here like me, there are people here who think like me and believe like me. I think that those marches serve a purpose. I think though, if the only thing we do is march, we'll never get to the end game. So it's gotta move from a march to a movement to political action. Otherwise, all it is 10,000 steps on my Fitbit.
And I got to leave it there?
Yeah.
Oh, the 10,000 steps are a good thing.
It's a good thing, yeah.
So thank you. This has gone too quickly. Thanks for a great discussion. We are out of time, but back again in June with another Civic cocktail. Thanks a ton for watching.